I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
Yeah, keep me right there. Everybody, wait a minute.
All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like, right here on Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Shout out to the Good Vibe Band and Mark Anthony. My little mix here. Come on in. Please do like, share, subscribe, put this in your socials, let other folks know you're here. All right. Once again, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining me, for joining us. Thanks again for your support of BPM. Thanks for your support of this show, for support of the book, for the broader work. And big shout out again to Geechee and the Barter and Build Collective for the book club breakdown discussion series that we've just wrapped up, and I appreciate that as well, and really just everybody who's been willing to engage the work on a serious and honest level, even where there's disagreement. I really appreciate it. So let's get into chapter 4 a little bit, and then I will jump back into the chat. And but I want to make sure, because again, I'm not sure if Coco is doing confronting contradictions today, but I want to make sure we get out of the way if she is, and if not, to at least make room for the rest of us to do whatever else we need to do, and for me to go teach one of those 4 classes. No, I'm just playing. So anyway, but chapter 4 is for me, it's obviously something I thought was important and needed to be talked about, but I admit that I struggle. This chapter for me is probably the one I struggled with the most, and even in trying to make some adjustments for the second edition, because I admit that there are times where I struggle with, well, I've said before, I struggle with organizing and arranging my thought and argument in some cases more than others. And this was one of them. How best to explain what I'm trying to say, how best to try to break down the methods and the approach of those who are, as this chapter is focused on, the big 3 modern purveyors. And I do want to shout out the publisher again, because in the initial drop in the initial run of the book, there was what for me was just this massive error. I mean, it was a massive error in the printing. They had somehow truncated a sentence and moved a portion of a sentence, so it just was really unclear. And it really bothered me, because it's bad enough when I find mistakes in my work that I've made that I didn't catch. But when they make one that I didn't make, I was, but to their credit, they did a reprinting or whatever, and so the current editions or versions don't have the error, and I really appreciate that. So I do want to at least shout them out for that. I think they deserve credit for that because I caught it, they corrected it, and I appreciate it. But so the big difference in this edition is that so what I'm talking about in this section is how. So previous chapters talked a little bit about the history and some of the context of the development of the concept of buying power. But what this chapter does is bring it into its more contemporary form by looking at in the so-called modern era, how did the myth of buying power, of Black buying power, get weaponized and even farther and distributed. And it was, I really am still a little bit shocked all these years later that when I first started doing this research, I couldn't believe how routine it was that if there was a source given for the claim of buying power in a given article or news story, every single one of them went back to the Selig Center. If you peeled back enough layers, I remember at one point I was on a Chicago radio show years ago, and I did not do well. It was early on in my research, and I had been focused on what is, I don't think it exists anymore because the founder passed away, but the Black Target Market News, which functioned much like I talk about in this chapter, some of these other Black press functionaries to promote the myth of buying power as a mechanism of attracting ad revenue. And I remember looking at their reports, and because they initially would get a lot of the references, a lot of Black, this would have been in the early 2000s at this point, I think, when I started really beginning to look at this in any kind of way. And there would be all these references to Target Market News, and then I would look at Target Market News. Where were they getting it? Target Market News. Where are they getting it? Peel back, and then even the Selig Center. With a little bit of help from Nielsen, and then now the McKinsey Group. And something tells me, now that I'm looking at it here, this should be a capital K, right? Yeah. Is that a capital K? I don't think that's capital. That's not a capital K. That should be capitalized. So there's another error. That's going to bother me. Now that I didn't even notice it till just now. That's going to bother me forever. Anyway. But McKinsey is and company is the new, I'm noticing increasing source. But as we talk about, or as I try to talk about in this chapter, we'll talk about a little bit today, they have the same flawed methodology. They're not bringing anything new methodologically. They're just bringing a new level maybe of emphasis or renewed level of emphasis. And adding themselves as a source has made it more difficult, I think, for the myth to be challenged. And the essential, well, and essentially what I could say, I'll just say here, is that the way they all work is that the Selig Center, McKinsey and Company, and Nielsen are all in different ways, not exactly the same way, but they all exist in their various niches to assist business, to assist corporations, to assist advertising agencies, to assist intelligence agencies even, specifically in terms of McKinsey. They're here to assist the elite, to assist wealth, in maximizing that wealth. maximizing their investments. McKinsey in particular, and I got to read a little bit about them. One of the new books about them I read a good portion of, and some podcasts that I reference in the chapter. I mean, McKinsey, and I don't do them justice in this chapter, are really horrifically ensconced power players at every level of the political and economic elite, where people who work for them end up in high-level political positions. People who work for them, it's seen as almost like a rites of passage for those wanting to go into high-level economic or political leadership. And they have a long history of helping corporations and municipalities and governments exploit workers, suppress labor, destroy economies, prop up other economies. It's so it shouldn't be taken lightly. And I don't think I do enough to drive the point home in this chapter that when McKinsey gets involved, or to the extent that they get involved and they now have their own whole wing dedicated to a focus on race and wealth, we should take note. We should have another level of, or perhaps another alarm or flag should go up, because this is, from what I can tell, is a more powerful and vicious entity than the Selig Center, that has, it could be argued, a wider reach globally, nationally, a more penetrative reach in terms of influence and access. So when they're carrying the mythology, it's going to have even a more pernicious and negative and harmful effect. And I don't think, again, in just sort of preparing for today, I'm noting that I didn't do enough in this chapter to make that point clear. So glad to have the opportunity to do it here. So then what I just sort of go through some of the history starting, and this is largely a continuation from the first edition, that again, the Selig Center in the Selig Center for Economic Growth at the Terry College of Business, housed in the Bank of America Financial Center in Athens, Georgia. I always think it's hilarious to point that out. And its leader, Jeffrey Humphreys, have been for 30 plus years now, the predominant producers of this mythology. And what they do is, having read many of their early reports and then one of their more recent, for the first edition, full, more modern reports, have been for a long time using scandalous methods for making a claim that is recharacterized as Black economic strength. One of my favorites from back in the day was that in their earlier renditions of the myth was they said that because there are fewer Black people in the somewhere around this 68 to 70 plus age range, at which point most people slow their spending, because there were fewer Black people in that age range. The argument by the Selig Center was that this gave Black people a greater buying power because they didn't exist in the category where buying power is said to slow. And when you matched it at the time that I did this initially for Black Agenda Report with the life expectancy of Black men and women, the argument that the Selig Center was making was that ultimately, because Black people have a less healthy experience and live shorter lives and die sooner, they don't live to be old enough not to spend, at which point they are of no value to the economy. And that's what the Selig Center, and I probably should have brought that back in as an example too, to demonstrate the horrific methodology they use to produce this ridiculous claim. To somehow suggest that you are unhealthy and die earlier, but this somehow makes you more economically powerful, to have that characterized as actual economic power, when what they're really saying is you are of less value and power to the economy once you can't spend in it. because you've died. I should have, again, another. So I'm not off to a good start here today. I'm 18 minutes in, and I've compiled at least 3 flaws I wish I would have addressed. Wow. Yeah, I'm not off to a good start here today. Nonetheless, there it is. So I am glad, and I did add this in the second edition, reference to my exchange with Dr. Ben Chavis, who is, or at least at the time was the current, well, was at the time the president, I think he still is, CEO of the NNPA. And for those who are not familiar with the Black press, and again, shout out to Dr. Todd Stephen Burrows, who has done more than any for me, and I think probably done more than anybody. Let me wheel that back, just because we boys. But he's done more for me than anybody in helping me learn and understand the history and the role of the Black press, going back to his dissertation at the University of Maryland and his endless amounts of columns and books and articles, et cetera. So, but one of the points that one of the things I learned from Dr. Burrows is the central role that the NNPA, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, has played, which is the Black press. It's the sort of the umbrella organization of the Black press. So they help get the Black press published, distributed, mentioned, referenced, and they help organize efforts to attract more ad revenue by promoting, for the longest of time, up until even very recently, this idea that Black people have this buying power. So I was very happy having this opportunity in this interview with Ben Chavis to raise with him directly that there's a flaw in your methodology that has a negative impact on Black audiences interpreting and understanding the economy and then doing something about it. He seemed to acknowledge it. He then claimed during the interview that they would not be working with Nielsen anymore, which somewhat missed the point, but that he would be addressing this. But very recently, and certainly at the time of the publication of the second edition, the NNPA's website was still making reference to buying power, which means that again, it's pervasive throughout the Black press, the Black commercial press, that is, because they want ad revenue from white corporations. And that's one of the core fundamental contradictions that I was confronted with when doing this research. That I almost felt like a very, a much politically softer version of what Zach Kondo has said about his work on Malcolm X's assassination. He went into it saying, I wanted to disprove that the Nation of Islam had anything to do with it, and I couldn't reach that conclusion. I almost felt the same way in this sense, that I wanted to go into this to prove that there are no complicit Black forces involved in promoting this mythology, and unfortunately I could not reach that conclusion. The commercial Black press is inextricably, I think at this point, wrapped up in promoting this mythology because they have to. And what I would have loved, I'll say it again, I would have loved to have been able to find those old videos from Tom Joyner's website where it's performed by his audience members saying to white advertisers, we will deliver you our buying power if Uncle Tom tells us to by promoting your product. So you should advertise with him. And they called him Uncle Tom. I can't believe he didn't find that. And then I'm doubly upset that Diallo wants to say that I look like him. So we're going to beef on Friday. Just another FYI. It's warfare. And then this is just an example that I try to show here, and that actually comes from the December 31st, 2022 front page of the NNPA website, where they continue to say that the buying power of African-American community is $1.3 trillion, according to Nielsen Media Research and NNPA Research Services. And then when you look it up, as I talk about in this chapter, all of the methodology is flawed. It has nothing to do with understanding the actual economic condition of a community, and has everything to do with trying to get to help advertisers direct their revenue, their ad revenue, so that it gets the most return. But it is this uncritical circulation of buying power mythology that encourages pundits and activists alike to accept and appropriate the myth for their own purposes. So there's at least these three things that I wanted to emphasize in this chapter: that not everyone cites a source for their reference to buying power, but all who do cite one of these big three, with Selig Center leading the way since the early 1990s. So, I've never found an exception to this. I'm sure there has to be one, but I've never seen one. That is, every reference either doesn't exist or goes back to one of these three, with Selig being the leading one. Each of the big three use roughly the same methodology in making their buying power claims, which may be acceptable for attracting and allocating advertising revenue, but is illogical when explaining the actual economic condition of any community. And three, and almost imperceptibly few pundits or journalists bother to check this methodology, its accuracy in design, or the accuracy of its claimed outcomes. Again, I am still a little shocked that I've never found anyone else who looked into this. So I start with this example that was one of my favorite, and there were many more I probably could have used if there was more room, or if I wanted to have a much longer book or something. But this one is emblematic of how many of them would go. I would reach out to a reporter once they would make reference to the claim, in this case, that Black women own about 1.5 million businesses in the country, according to the latest U.S. Census figures, generating more than $42 billion in sales. This was an NPR story. And the response I got was that I got it from the Selig Center. And I asked if she could share her source. So she wrote back, "The Selig Center study, unfortunately, is only available by purchase. I referenced their statistics that they were available," and I copied and pasted this word for word, so any error is in the original email. I referenced their statistics that they were available in their public press release, and confirmed it with Jeff Humphreys with the Selig Center, who worked on the report. And then my email to Humphreys never got answered. So, but this is sort of the point again, that this is a reporter working for NPR. This is a well-resourced outlet. This is not so they're not willing to spend the $125 at the time, which is what I ended up spending to get the report that she and her colleagues didn't pay for. And then they're reporting something that's meant to tell the truth about the economic condition of a community, and they're basing it, without checking the claims, on a press release. And then, of course, confirming it with the press release's author. So yeah, $125 is a barrier for lay audiences, and apparently for well-funded media outlets. But fools like myself kick in the money, pay for it, read it, and are disturbed and realize you've charged money because you want to discourage people from looking at it and buying it and looking at it, because it's methodologically a mess. So, and they claim in the report that the goal is to raise the economic intelligence of the country. That is the NPR outlet Marketplace. That was, which I had been interviewed on for a while. I'd been interviewed a number of times on that program for just these kinds of, and in each case there was some kind of flaw. And in one point, did I talk about it? I don't think I talked about it. By the way, I should do a Patreon story. I don't know if I've shared this or how often I've shared it on this platform. I mentioned Ben Chavis a minute ago. I should share with Patreon what my memories are of that trip I was on with him and my brother back in the day when he had converted to the Nation of Islam and became a leader in the Nation of Islam. And I went on a little southern tour with them for a week or two, or something like a week maybe, just driving throughout the South speaking, and it was quite an experience. But I think I'll save. I've got to do a couple Patreon only things. That was that was an experience. So similarly, this on Marketplace, I'm trying to remember, there was this one time I think it was with Marketplace, because a few times I've reached back out to people, because before the interview I would say to them, one of the concerns I have is that either through editing or misunderstanding, the context I'm trying to provide or the argument I'm making gets cut or misunderstood, misrepresented. And there were a couple times I would reach back out after the fact to say, see, you did what I said was going to happen, or what I was concerned about happening. So in other words, there's a real problem with the reporting. There's a real problem with journalism just in general that ends up being magnified when applied to something like this, because it's one thing if the bad journalism is misleading people on something about something less directly impacting their overall analysis of their condition than economics. But when it's done this way to Black people, I think it has another level of. So one of the things that's often confused is just what is buying power. So here I'm trying to show how Selig Center defines it in that paywalled, expensive report, where they start off by saying, simply defined, buying power is the total personal income of residents that is available after taxes for spending on virtually everything that they buy, but it does not include dollars that are borrowed or that were saved in previous years. For a long time, I wanted to ask Humphreys about that line, because on the one hand, the total expenditures that they claim Black people are making are reflective of expenditures involving credit. But here they're saying they're not counting dollars that were borrowed in previous years. So if you're carrying over debt from one year to the next, are you saying that I wanted to clarify, because it seems like they're saying by not including money borrowed previously, they're not including this is one way that they can avoid including the debt. I should have written this out too. Dang. Because I don't make this point in the chapter. I should have. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that by claiming that they're not counting money borrowed previously, it's a way for them to obfuscate or deny, diminish, erase the idea of debt and the impact of carried over debt one year to the next on a community and their economic condition, so that they can promote the community as having a stronger economic condition for advertisers to feel more comfortable spending ad revenue in these spaces, with the idea that people can in fact afford the products that are being advertised. Damn. I somehow diminished this in my own focus and didn't. I should have made that point because one of the reasons I know I didn't come back to it is because for a long time I was trying to get in touch with Humphreys. I wanted someone to explain this point to me, and I never could get any kind of response at all or any clarity from anyone on this point here because it's not meant to be understood is really the point. But I should have written out the thought I just had. Because they're trying to say that they're counting all the money that's available after taxes for spending on everything that you buy, but they're not including totals if you borrowed it previously, because then that would account for the debt, and they don't want people's debt to be included in this concept because they're not trying to assess the actual economic condition. They're trying to falsely promote Black people as having a strength that they don't actually have. What I got caught up on is this next part here that I italicized in the book, in my book from their report. Unfortunately, there are no geographically precise surveys of annual expenditures and income of all nations' major racial and ethnic groups. Even estimates of expenditures by race or ethnicity are difficult to find, especially for individual states. So the Selig Center addresses this problem by providing estimates of Black, Native American, Asian, white, Hispanic, and non-Hispanic buying power for the nation, the 50 states, and the District of Columbia. These current dollar estimates and projections indicate the growing economic power of various racial or ethnic groups. The language here is so jacked up. On the one hand, we're not counting debt. On another hand, now I'm going more than hands than humans have, or at least, so point A, flaw A in this section that I should have highlighted better is that they don't count the debt so they can avoid debt people have. Flaw B, there are no precise surveys of annual expenditures of income of the nation's major racial and ethnic groups. So tripling down on flaws A and B, they just lean into it and say, you know what? We're just going to triple down with the estimates and projections. And then in the very next phrase, it's a semicolon. It's in the same sentence. They go on to say that this is indicative of the growing economic power of various racial or ethnic groups. So you could see how people who are not paying close attention could be confused by this, because if they don't read carefully even in the next phrase, that the point here, the next several phrases, after this claim of growing economic power of various racial economic groups, what they should have put there instead of a semicolon is something akin to the word "to." The power that these groups represent for us to measure, that is, for we, the ruling elite, to measure the vitality of these geographic markets, to help us, I'm adding now, to judge business opportunities for startups or expansions, gauge businesses' annual sales growth against potential market increases, indicate market potential of new and existing products, and guide targeted advertising campaigns. Nowhere in there do they say, so that we can help Black people help themselves understand better their actual economic condition. This is all to help advertisers and businesses. But they use the language of economic power because to properly understand it, the only way to understand it is to understand that by economic power, they mean the power to enrich them. And as the Selig Center says in their own work, the Selig Center was created to convey economic expertise to Georgia businesses and entrepreneurs. Nowhere in there does it say to help Black people understand their actual economic conditions so they can better make decisions about what they need to do to get free. And then I actually just trace here how the methodology devolves, because in the initial selling the Negro video, Secretary Weeks, the Commerce Secretary Weeks, directly ties buying power to the actual income of the Black community. By now, we're reduced to estimates, projections that are not based on anything that could be considered precise data, and that are tied to extrapolations based on surveys of what people bought, not on what they actually earn, what they actually have, or what they could actually do with that money. And of course, they ignore, that is, these buying power reports, wealth as opposed to income, which for most economists, honest economists, is the better way to understand the actual condition of a community. But they're not interested in that because wealth has nothing to do with consumption and consumer spending. And then this, I just struggled a little bit, I think, with this chapter in terms of how best to organize and explain how they're where these numbers are coming from and how they're using them. But just trying to draw out certain points here that in the Selig Center's own statements, readers should note that buying power is not the equivalent of aggregate money income as defined by the Census Bureau, because the Selig Center's estimates are based on disposable personal income data obtained from the Bureau of Economic Analysis rather than money income values issued by the Census Bureau. The result is significantly higher estimates. The result is significantly higher estimates of buying power. It should also be emphasized that the Selig Center's estimates are not equivalent to aggregate consumer expenditures as reported in the Consumer Expenditure Survey that is conducted each year by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. One reason is because as I talked to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics representative, the Bureau of Labor Statistics they acknowledge that they're not trying to teach people about the economic condition of any community. They're here to help explain, again, just some basic stats about how people spend and how people consume, what their income is, but they're not making assessments of power or condition. They're just tracking basic numbers that are supposed to be used by honest investigators for other whatever. But and also the BLS rep said that they don't count what is spent using credit. So again, if we attach, as I do a little bit, I think it's in this chapter, a little bit of credit card debt to consumption, and if consumption dollars that are being assessed by Selig and others for these buying power totals are, it again confuses everything and makes it seem like Black people have more, which is one reason I think, in addition to what was said here, that the buying power numbers come out bigger. The estimates are larger because they're reflective of extrapolations and estimates based on surveys of what a handful of Black consumers are said to have spent and on what they've spent that money on. And then somehow including in the overall spending totals, because the numbers the details are not investigated, what was spent on credit and not actually on what someone earned or had in their bank account. And when you do it that way, it does make it seem like people have more, because of course they do, if the more means more to spend on products they don't own or control or benefit from in terms of the wealth that's created. I hope that makes sense, but this is part of the problem that I have in trying to organize and break this down, even in writing. By the way, I thought this was important, at least for me, that in investigating Selig's methodology and how they use the Bureau of Economic Analysis, I thought I found one maybe sort of I maybe could have made this more clear too, sort of a font of or a point of origin for this nonsense about equating what Black people spend to the gross domestic product of other nations, and then saying that we're the 16th largest economy, blah 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 blah. Because if the Selig Center, as they say, they misuse the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and then they come across here and misuse data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which when I looked into, discovered that the Bureau of Economic Analysis, unlike the Bureau of Labor Statistics, is focused on gross domestic product and the national economies of various countries. This one in particular, of course. So they're not looking so much at the specifics of individual consumer spending data. They're looking at the overall impact, I guess you could say, of that and other segments of the economy on the gross domestic product, which is, I think I'm correct in saying, in my oversimplification, is really best understood as a measurement of the wealth created for those who own the economy. But GDP, as I do talk about in this chapter, is not to ever be confused with how you measure the condition of people in the community. And no honest economist ever does use GDP to assess inequality within a community, because GDP does not assess. GDP is a measurement of the wealth created, all the money spent on all the goods and services and products in a given year in a given society. That's all it is. It is not a measurement of who has how much and who benefits and how much from that. GDP does not capture the distribution of growth, and as a result cannot reflect inequality. And that's really the fundamental conflict that I have, and that I think this analysis has with everything, and that all forms of radical analyses have with everything, because the focus is on the distribution, maybe as much, if not more than anything. So then I go through and show a little bit about how the Black press has worked with Nielsen and the NNPA. And as I say here, discussed further in Chapter 5, Nielsen has been engaged in a long-term and close relationship with the Black press in creating reports making reference to the claim but offering no accurate explanation for their purpose. Unfortunately, the commercial Black press continues to largely ignore the flawed methodology and uncritically falsely report the claims of buying power to a wide and unwitting audience. And then I show some examples of that. And there's just so many of them. The reports, quoting here from Nielsen, have become widely respected industry chronicles touted for their exclusive insights, data, trends, and perspective that better prepare marketers. Oh, that's what that should say. Wow. I hope that was that my typo? Yeah, Lee, this is not, I'm having a bad day. I'm having a bad breakdown. Another error. But anyway, the point is that they better prepare marketers and brands to connect with the audience, this audience segment. Dang, I hate that. I really hate that. But by concurrently sharing the report with millions of readers around the country, we have helped create conscious consumers who are aware now more than ever of how their economic power has a direct impact on the marketplace overall. Conscious consumers, by which they talk, by the way, they talk about that in terms of Black people just wanting to see some symbolic reference to their culture when they go shopping. They're not even concerned if you own it. So I do add. So the second edition adds more again, as I said about McKinsey and their increased involvement in all of this. For instance, in true to form, a recent report from McKinsey began Black consumers' collective economic power is set to expand dramatically from about 910 billion in consumption in 2019 to 1.7 trillion in nominal dollars, equal to the projected GDP of Mexico in 2030. So there's McKinsey right there making that ridiculous false equation that is not appropriate to an actual economic analysis. GDP again does not measure inequality, so you don't know within society where, given in this case, GDP doesn't tell you the distribution of income or wealth, racially, ethnically, gender, cross gender, et cetera, so forth. And it doesn't say anything in terms of this issue of comparison to national economies. Well, what is the relationship of Mexico's economy to the broader economy? Can Mexico be said to be some independent, autonomous, sovereign, liberated economy? Or is it more or less colonized and dependent on so-called first world support, investment, defense? Didn't NAFTA wasn't it chapter 11 of NAFTA that destroyed the democratic autonomy of Mexico and Canada and the United States? If anything that they would decide would abrogate the corporate business interests of signatories to that agreement? Don't I remember that correctly? So what are we then saying? That Black people should be happy to be some equivalent colonized national economy? But McKinsey is again. So I put one brief reference to this book that I read this a good chunk of in preparation for this, but and then ultimately used very little because just of time and space and really ability to organize how I would want to use it all. I again struggle with that. So, but for more than 100 years, McKinsey has been in the business of consulting corporations at high cost to create conditions favorable to themselves, often to the detriment of workers and the environment. McKinsey's history of service to the largest companies and U.S. intelligence agencies has led them to be described by a former McKinsey consultant thusly: to those convinced that a secretive cabal controls the world, usual suspects are Illuminati, lizard people, or globalists. They are wrong, naturally. There is no secret society shaping every major decision determining the direction of human history. There is, however, McKinsey and Company. And when you read about them, I mean, they're notorious. It's so again, I think we should be disturbed that they're getting increasingly involved in promoting this mythology. And then they do so claiming that they're a step up in terms of how they arrive at their conclusions. This latest calculation uses data from the 2019 U.S. Census and 2019 Consumer Expenditure Surveys from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and include the full population of Black Americans, which the 835 billion figure does not. So that's why they upped the amount in terms of the spending dollar value in one of their reports vis-a-vis one put out, I think, by Nielsen or Selig, which is both ultimately the same thing. But again, they're misusing BLS statistics. And as I note here, again, as previously noted, the BLS disavow these conclusions, do not claim to be making an assessment of Black people's or anyone's economic condition, and merely compile reported survey data on incomes and spending. So McKinsey, with just like a new level of authority, has just added themselves and in short, just made things worse. But large sums of buying power dollars do not reference or reflect the autonomous power of any group to use that money as they would choose monolithically and to the benefit of any whole. But when reports of and reporting about buying power are examined and juxtaposed with the simultaneous but largely ignored economic analyses, what becomes most apparent is the process by which the myth becomes reality. And then in the chapter 5, I talk about the media environment that is so welcoming of this level of propaganda. So, so that's it. So I'm going to jump back in the chat for any comments, critiques, queries, conundrums, catechisms, cacophony, calumny, condemnation. And we can take a couple of minutes to get into it. Otherwise, again, thanks for the time. And it's always a pleasure to very publicly confront one's flaws. Infrastructure, my man. Yeah, that was. No, I have not. Have I ever done a power mapping study? I have not. I have not. And I don't know that I've looked at many either. Right, there you go. Optimistically. I don't know. We'll see. So you use this chapter? When I present on capitalism and colonize, are any of these presentations online? I'd be interested to see how you use it and how you organize the argument, because I read this chapter was brutal for me. I have outlines and rewrite. I can't seem to get the flow, or I don't know. Yeah, I would like. Yeah, please send the slides. I would be interested. Thank you. Because I did. Did you see the interview with Breakthrough News? Did McKinsey whistleblower? In fact, I did, and in fact, I have it. Where are my notes? I think I meant to look at it today with you all, but yeah, it's right here. I did. Here, let's take a quick look at that. Now that you brought it up, we can at least take a quick second here, because this is, and I'll put the link in the show description if it's not there already.
Fixing of the Canadian wheat market, I think it was, or bread prices. But just so we can get it out of the way for people who maybe don't know, I mean, I think people maybe have some sense of what a consultancy is, but where does McKinsey fit in that world of high-powered consultants?
Yeah, so McKinsey is widely considered the most prestigious strategy or management consulting firm. And management consultants purport to solve tough problems for organizations, typically for-profit businesses. This might look like entering a new market or finding cost savings, often in the form of layoffs. It could be helping two companies merge. It could be doing due diligence on whether an acquisition makes sense. It's a huge range of things, but typically you're serving senior leadership at a for-profit company.
And you were at McKinsey, and you had quite the experience there, and you focused in your piece on the issue of Rikers Island. Can you talk a bit about what that entailed, your time at McKinsey? When you started out, you said you were just 21 years old.
Yeah, this kind of speaks to the reputation McKinsey had, because McKinsey had never done any work for any correctional clients, as far as I knew. And they were brought in to try and help Rikers reduce violence across their entire facility. And this was just a huge problem, still is a huge problem at Rikers, as we might get into. The project didn't really pan out. And I was idealistic undergraduate. I had worked in prison reform and been a teaching assistant for a prison education program in upstate New York. And so the idea of going to work for reforming a correctional facility directly was just really appealing. And so I was the youngest person on my team, and I was there helping manage initiatives and try and find ways that we could reduce violence. But we were very constrained in what we could actually do. We were looking at technocratic tweaks on the margin, not really able to look at the bigger picture, which might have actually done something more about the problem.
Well, I'm glad you actually mentioned that, because I feel the reputation that these consultancies, whether we're talking about McKinsey or whoever, is that they're going to come in and bring in these sort of like transformative strategies that are going to change everything around and, so on and so forth as it goes. But you talked about this a lot with Rikers, and also your time at ICE working for McKinsey, this sort of concept, you do execution, not policy. But it seems like in a way that in and of itself is a policy choice not to actually really engage.
Anyway, I'm gonna stop it there. I'll put the link in the chat. The interview. It's not that it's bad, but it didn't. There was one. I'm looking again. I think I found another mistake in this book. God damn. There was a podcast in addition to the book that I reference, that I did properly reference in here. There's a podcast that I had listened to that I thought I referenced in here, that really broke down McKinsey. I thought a little, no disrespect to Breakthrough News, which I love and support, and blah, 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 blah. That particular interview just didn't pop in the way. But the book that I referenced in my book, When McKinsey Comes to Town, by Bogdanich and Forsyth, that came out in 2022, is really fascinating. And then there was this podcast, where did I reference it though? Because I'm not seeing it in the footnotes here, so I'll have to try to find that. It was anyway. But When McKinsey Comes to Town is the book. I think is something that everybody should check out if they're interested in following up on that issue. But one of the points, that's what I wanted to get at, that in the breakthrough piece that I'm reminded of is, again, just like Mayor Pete and others, they come through McKinsey on their way to power. So they're not there to help assess the situation. They're there to help get to the next level so they can benefit from the situation. Is there a relationship between the National Newspaper Publishers Association and the National Association of Black Journalists? I don't know to what extent it's official, but there's absolutely one, in the sense that they're all intermingled. So almost everybody that would be in the NNPA or affiliated with the NNPA would be part of NABJ, because one of the problems that I used to have with NABJ, with all due respect, was that it was largely, to me, a gathering of people wanting to get jobs in the commercial press. They weren't there to change commercial media. They weren't there to challenge or to radicalize. They were mostly there to get jobs within. So it lost some of the, for me, the I think maybe at one point hopeful luster that existed. So that's the extent of what I would know about interaction. Yeah, Fab Socialist is, I'm sure, who you're talking about. A lot of people must have much watched her work, because a lot of people sent that to me, and I actually interacted with. I saw it myself, thanked her for it. She's mentioned my book a couple of times actually on her show, so I appreciate that, and obviously appreciate that. But anyway, so just to wrap it up, chapter 4 again. I think I did an okay job of, and I think more important, I think I did an important job of showing how the myth of buying power is, in its modern sense, generated. And I actually like that about this book, what I've done here, that I was able to show some of the deep origins, so to speak, and then pick up the modern return, so to speak, in the early 90s. And having mentioned previously, and I maybe could have blended this a little bit better, the issue that again was misunderstood by people who see clips or even these segments but haven't read the work or don't know the work in the context of my work, or who misunderstand what I'm saying about Dr. Amos Wilson and others. But the point is that I think I did a good job of showing how the myth was created in its infancy, and then picked up in the 80s or the 90s by the Selig Center, and then Amos Wilson, and just as an example of how I think it got popularized within certain segments of the Black community, really all segments, and which was really I'm saying Wilson made a mistake, but I'm also recognizing his hard work and his contribution and his centrality to Black radical thought. So it's not, anyway. But I think I did a good job of showing in this chapter again the modern purveyors of it, but and I just lost my thought. And and a little bit of the way the myth is distributed through bad journalism connected to the flawed interests of the Black commercial press. There were more, and I think I have them in there. I think I skipped past the pages, but there were so many more examples of. It doesn't happen as much anymore. It's interesting that the more I've written on it, and since the book has come out, the less I get asked about this by the Black press, but or any press, any sort of. But for a while there, whether it was Marketplace on NPR, or which was a couple of times, or Variety's various Black press outlets, it was asked of me what I thought, and then these weird things would happen. My interviews got, in one case, I'm sure it's in there, the interview got removed, and the whole critique got erased from the website, and then the same woman back reporting for that same press outlet comes back to regurgitate the mythology later on as if we had never had a conversation, or she never. And then she acknowledged to me in an email that the editors took it down or edited the story. So so what I like also about what I've done here is beyond, and what I do in the next chapter that we'll get to next week, is that beyond my point about buying power, I have, I think, some important things to say in this book about journalism, the political economy of journalism, the media environment that we're in, all of which make this kind of mythology easily acceptable and distributed. So, yeah, and next week we'll be back to do chapter 5. And look, so I hope you all will come back, and those who see this later will come back themselves. All right. Let's see, Joshua. What's up, Josh? Thanks. This chapter is a challenge because it feels the most like a textbook where you have concepts that need to be defined, explained, contextualized. But that's where the deep understanding comes from. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. But I do at least want to acknowledge that there are levels of analysis and writing and organization of thought that are above mine, where people are able to really do in brilliant ways the work that I don't think I quite was able to do in this chapter in particular. It stands out to me the most in terms of my inability to make it plain, as they say. So, so that's why I really appreciate being able to build with you all, and to those who have invited me for discussions. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I appreciate it. It's not, and I thought I thought I might not say it, but I'm gonna say it. A couple times I see that I get criticized as just wanting attention and this, that, and a third. And on some level, of course, any of us who come out publicly, do this work publicly, want some sort of attention. But I don't want any of the silliness that I engage in or that is put on me to. I don't want the point that is really at the core for me. It is the exchange. It is the intellectual exchange. It is selfishly. I don't get to it. I want this. And of course, anyone wants their work in certain moments to be the subject of deep critical investigation. And I want people who I respect. I'm appreciative when people I respect honor me by investigating and attending to something I've done. So, but it's not just for some Jared wants Jared's attention. It's that Jared, I want to participate in intellectual exchange. I love it. And then with these issues, I do want these issues to be discussed and chopped up. So I don't know how better to do it these days than in this format, in this platform, in this way. So I really appreciate when we no, I mean, this, Emma, I know, this is sometimes what I'm accused of, that it's just about vanity. And then somebody accused me of in the debate with Reggie and them of really, there's such an odd they said he claims he's a socialist, but he's a capitalist because he sells his book. And I don't think people properly understand, like sometimes maybe I should do something on this too one day, because I don't think people properly understand the non-benefit to producing this work. Even if I was selling the book, which is, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. But really, what bothers me about those arguments, this is the point I'm trying to get at. What bothers me about those arguments is that they're not intellectual, they're not critical, they're not substantive, they're not meaningful, and they're not about the work. It's not about the argument. It's not about the analysis. It's not a meaningful response to my argument. So even when people disagree, if it's like it's whack. It's not even a fun disagreement. It's just so whack. Just what's. No, of course, they're never gonna get a bestseller label on it. I'm not making any money. There's no. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what. I would be curious what percentage of all authors in all fields and all areas of authorship make actual money. Now Springer is I did ask them about this. I do not have the copyright permission to do an audiobook, and I'm not really clear why they don't want to do that. I may follow up with them on that again and just ask again, because there's by the way, I don't think I've shared this. The first edition of this book was delayed by at least a year because of turnover at the publisher that I didn't even know about. The process got delayed because the initial people I was talking to disappeared. So some of it may be about turnover. Maybe I need to wait and catch the right. You know where I'm at with the mixtapes. That's why when people ask, the public answer is that there can be no legal audio production of a book because I don't have the copyright permission. And that is, of course, the truth. I will. Oh, and I should read it. Mm. Tapes out the trunk. Oh, did I mention that? Okay, I might have mentioned that. Okay. All right. Anyway, dang, that's twice today. I'm gonna work on that. I'm gonna get that out. I'm gonna get that off. I'm gonna get that crutch. I'm gonna get rid of that crutch. Yeah, there has been a turnover since I last asked. So I have not asked this latest crew that I've been dealing with. So I will. But that said, to folks still looking for copies, really the best bet is, speaking of this whole critique about me selling them, the best thing for you to do, especially if you're in the DMV and Baltimore, which I know is not, if you are in what I consider if you're in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, or in the New Jersey area in coming weeks per Renee's event, you should really reconsider your relationship to activist organizations in those communities, because that's where free copies start popping up. If you connect yourself with grassroots organization, you might get a free copy. I wonder if I could get Daruba to read it. I know Baltimore's not the DMV. I'm saying in my mind, why can't we all be together? Right, there you go, Yipper. DMV and Baltimore. Can we, if you, yeah. But other than that, I really appreciate all of this. So I'm gonna go get ready to head off to one of my 4-4. And all right, Obi. All right. We trying to unify around here. It's soda. I don't know. Don't send it to me. Don't send it to me. Right. There's Baltimore and then there's the DMV. We settled this out. I get you. It's just in my little fantasy, it's all one spot. So, all right, good people. Thank you very much for coming through. Please like, share, subscribe, join if you can. Patreon, blackpowermedia.org for more. Ring the bell so you don't miss forthcoming forthcoming offerings. And I will catch you next time right here at I Mix What I Like and throughout the BPM platform. As usual, like Fred Hampton used to say, peace only if you're willing to fight for it, though. God damn it. Peace, everybody. Thanks again.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.